Well, good evening, everyone. We sure appreciate everybody coming out tonight. I'm Stan Pickett, current mayor here in the city of Mesquite. And, you know, we had all these changes happen last year with the citizens that voted for these changes, and just felt like maybe that some people still had some questions and things and were kind of wondering how the new form of government and all is set up. So we thought we'd have a couple of 2 or 3 meetings and come out to the neighborhoods and talk a little bit about these things. It's not what and how, it's just why, what did we do or not, why I should say, because once they're elected, it's done. So we're going to really just have staff talk to you tonight. We're not really here to talk about any politics. We've got some various things that you'll see up here on the board, and you can read most of these. Talking a little bit about what is the form of government, the council management form. But we also want to talk a little bit about, you know, what's the single member mean? You know, what's different than what it was before the election changed it? And talk a little bit about just questions you have too as you listen to this tonight, and something's not clear, we'll just be sure and interrupt us and let us know. We're going to have about 3 of these meetings, as I said. We're going to have information online. We're just trying to do as much as we can to push information out about the change, just so that you have an idea, and your friends and neighbors, and when you go back to your homes and relatives in town, that they can ask you, and you can know where to point them in the right direction if we're not good enough at getting the message out there and getting it across. But we'll have presentations, like I said, our council manager form of government. What we need, if anyone's interested or has any friends that are interested for running for mayor or city council, what you may need to know about running. We'll talk a little bit about the budget process. We're kind of already started in that, and some of the requirements for council members. So really, we're just hoping to inform as best we can, and we appreciate so much your interest in what's going on. And with that, where to go? I'll turn it over to our city manager.
Thank you, Mayor, and thanks for the applause not one for me, I hope so. But again, I want to thank everyone for being here tonight. My name is Cliff Kahili. I'm the city manager, and I've worked for the city for 24 years, and I've been city manager for the last 3.5 years. And change is always a little bit scary sometimes. There's a lot of things going on, but one of the things about the new changes with the single-member district is they were part of a citizen initiative. Citizens spoke, wanted to see some different things. The city council appointed a task force, and that group met for well over 6 months to really listen to citizens on what the changes in the elected official structure should be. And so having all of that input from the citizens over that period of time, the council was able to come together, put a series of ballot initiatives towards the public, and then we went to an election a year ago this time and voted in several changes. These were changes to the actual charter, the guiding document for the city that included 6 single-member districts. We used to have 4 districts and 2 with 2 at-large council members that were voted on by the entire city. Now we have 6 single-member districts, and each of those districts are going to elect the person who represents them, with the mayor being elected at large by the entire city. We also implemented term limits, and now council members are limited to 4 2-year terms. And after 8 years of service, council members can no longer serve on the council unless they run for the position of mayor. We've also changed elections. The elections used to be in May, and staggered terms. So you would elect some council members would be up 1 year, the rest of them would be up the following year. Now we elect everyone at the same election at one time. So 7 council members are up for election, and the elections are now in November. With the input from the citizens that low voter turnout was a concern, and with November being a common election date, that maybe more people will participate in the municipal elections. And it is a new system for the city, and we want to make sure that everybody understands that system and understands that where these district lines are, because they're not the same districts that we had previously. We went from 4 to 6, and the process took quite a bit of study. We had a consultant come in and analyze the population, and we drew these district boundaries based on that population and the different makeup of the residents in those neighborhoods. So it was about a 4 or 5 month process working with these maps to make sure that the neighborhoods were kept together. We didn't draw a line down an alley, separate neighbors. We tried to keep cohesive groups of where everybody fit. And, I think for the most part, the council did a really good job of keeping these districts together and neighborhoods from not being separated. So with that, it's, there are some things that are still the same, and we wanted to make sure that residents understood how government works. If you're interested in running for council, that's one way to serve, but there are other ways through boards and commissions. We have several people who are in the audience today who serve on boards and commissions and advise the city council. So there's many ways to support the city, volunteer for the city. But if you're interested in being an elected official, we wanted to make sure you understood just how the city operated. So tonight we have several of the appointed positions here to kind of give you just a little bit of a deeper dive. I will say we did post this meeting to discuss specifically the single-member districts and the election process. So we can't really answer a lot of questions about what's going on in the community, but several of us are here. As we always are in public meetings, we'll be here through the end of the evening to answer any questions once the meeting has concluded. So with that, we'll kind of talk a little bit about the council manager form of government. And it is very common in Texas to have this form of government with cities over a population of 5,000. And basically, the council manager form of government is an elected body by the citizens hires a city manager to run the day-to-day operations of the city. This is in our charter, and it was decided when the charter was adopted in the 1950s that this would be our form of government. And basically, you have a political leadership of the mayor and city council who are basically engaged with the residents to develop policy, and the city manager is hired to run the day-to-day operations. Basically, if you want to put it in business terms, I function as the chief executive officer of the city, while the council is the board of directors who are answering to the shareholders, which are the citizens. When you look at the council manager form of government, the council has basically 3 duties that they are responsible for. They represent the people. They have the engagement and the interaction with the citizens through public meetings like this, town hall meetings, neighborhood meetings, and even through surveys and just typically phone calls that they receive from citizens inquiring about what can change in the city. The council develops policy based on that input, and our council has a good history of taking the input through surveys and through town halls and implementing action. And then to do that, they have to allocate funds. And so the council sets the tax rate, and they set the budget based on the revenues, and then they turn it over to the city staff to implement. And basically, my job is to support the city council's policy directions and to take a policy and make sure it's implemented as directed by the council. Contrary to popular belief, we just don't go run willy-nilly making up rules and all of that, writing code notices or issuing tickets. Our job is basically the council tells us what to write those tickets for and how aggressive to be. So implementation is basically our job. We take the resources that the council gives us through your tax dollars, and we take their plans and we develop strategies. Council approves those strategies, and we put them into place. And those come through different departments and projects that you see going around downtown. Again, it's service delivery. Our job as city staff is service delivery. And we, one of the primary functions of the city manager is to take 1,200 employees and align our day-to-day operations with the direction that the council gives us. And as you can imagine, it can be a difficult task because, we see things that we want to do, but it may not necessarily align with what the council does. And I have to make sure our focus is intently on achieving the goals of the city council. Like I said, we also enforce the rules. We have guys running around with guns who enforce certain parts of the penal code. We also have a group of people with ticket books that enforce things like high grass and broken fences and trash and junk. So those are a lot of the rules. We also make your restaurant safe, and we also make sure that all construction is done in an appropriate manner. And basically, in the simplest terms that I can put it, from our point of view, basically after hearing from the citizens, the council decides where we are going on a journey. They pick the point on the map where they want to go. And then it's up to staff to drive that bus along a route that the council approves. And all along the way, we are trying to do it and providing the best service delivery possible. I think I'm off there, Wayne. So, or did you? Okay. There are some limitations on how the council can enact policy and develop ordinances. So I wanted to kind of go in on kind of what we do and how we do these things with ordinances. In Texas, the legislature has provided 2 options for cities to operate. Once you reach a population of 5,000, you can move from a general law city where the legislature has specific rules on what you do and how you do it to what's called a home rule city. And a home rule city allows city council to develop a charter and to enact ordinances. And then the legislature then gives sometimes a broad roadway or a very narrow roadway on how those ordinances are implemented. And so you'll often hear that we are a home rule city. We decide what our ordinances are. It's not the legislature telling us. Again, the legislature does, put in their opinion quite often on how we should do things. And they do have some power over municipal governments. So just to kind of show you what it looks like in an organizational structure, you see the citizens of Mesquite are at the top. And we as staff are primarily focused and know that it's the citizens who direct us. The council is the conduit for those citizens. They take that input from the citizens. 145,000 people guide what happens in this city through the elected body. Then the elected body hires 4 appointed positions. The city attorney, who you'll hear from, the city secretary, who's also here tonight, the municipal court judge, and then the city manager. The council also hires an independent auditor to ensure that all of the funds that we are spending are spent in an appropriate manner. And what I feel is one of the most important pieces of this puzzle is the boards and commissions, because your council members are volunteers. They're not professional people who work on the city stuff all day long. They have jobs. They can't hear from citizens and make all of these decisions, so they rely on a body of citizens. Again, another group of volunteers to help guide planning and zoning, changes to exceptions and variances to our codes through Board of Adjustment. We have an animal advisory board. We have building standard boards who review our construction standards. Lots of boards and commissions that citizens serve on, and the council appoints those to help guide them. And then finally, this is the organization of my staff. As city manager, I have 1,200 employees that run the operations on a daily basis. Just to understand the difficulty of that is 234 of those guys have guns, and so I have to manage that group as well. So, and that's why we have a professional staff who are experts in their areas. So in my organization, we have 3 assistant city managers who have 14 departments made up of professionals who are experts in their field, and I'll brag on them. All of the people up there are exceptional at what they do, and they know their stuff, and they are good at guiding the council and providing advice on a day-to-day basis. And you'll hear from one of our rock stars here in a little bit through a budget presentation. So basically, that's how government works. It's that simple. No, I'm just kidding. It is a process, and it is not always easy. But I think we're very fortunate to have council members who are engaged and who do deeply care about where this community goes. And we don't have a lot of control over everything. We don't get to decide that we want an HEB and we want it to be at Cartwright and Lucas. I know everybody wants an HEB, and we need a grocery store at that intersection. It doesn't happen as easy as that. There are a lot of factors that go into it. But we have a team of people who are out there working on a day-to-day basis to make sure that our community is the best that it can be. So when these businesses are looking at us, they have the opportunity and will come to us. So with that, I'll briefly answer a few questions. We have a few other presentations tonight. So if there's any questions about form of government, the districts and how they were formed, be happy to answer those. And then, like I said, we'll be here after the meeting to answer anything tonight. So, well, with that, I'm going to turn it over to City Secretary Sonia Land.
Who can file for office? The qualifications to file for office, some are state law, some are charter requirements. You have to be a U.S. citizen, 18 years of age or older, a qualified voter of Mesquite at the time of filing of the petition. You have to reside in Mesquite for at least 1 year prior to the election. And if you're running for a particular district, if you're running for anything other than mayor, you have to live in that particular district for at least 120 days prior to the election. The state law requirement is you must have not been determined by final judgment of a court exercising probate jurisdiction to be totally mentally incapacitated or partially mentally incapacitated without the right to vote. All this is on the actual application when you file for office. You have to take an oath that all this is correct. And then you can't be convicted of a felony that you haven't been pardoned for. How do you file for office? There's several forms that are required to file for office. Some are Secretary of State forms, some are Texas Ethics Commission. There's an application for a place on the ballot, and on that is an oath that you have to state that everything on the application is true and correct. You have to have a petition signed with at least 25 signatures of qualified voters. Mayor can get signatures of anyone in the city because he's voted at large. If you're in a particular district, you have to have the qualified voters in your district to vote for you, to sign your petition. It's always a good idea to have more than 25 because not everyone is registered to vote, because I have to verify all these signatures whenever I receive the petition. You can check the signatures on the Dallas County Elections Department's webpage. You can look up their voter ID and confirm that they're voters, but you can always just get more signatures than needed just to make sure you have at least 25. Let's see. We have an acceptance of nomination form. We have a appointment of campaign treasurer. The important thing about this form is you cannot accept campaign funds until you file this form with my office. If you file the form before July 15th, then you're required to fill out and complete a campaign treasurer form that tells all your expenditures and funds that you've collected, and it's due by July 15th. And then there's a code of fair campaign practices. That's optional. Most people, well, everyone has always filled that out. It's just saying that you run a clean campaign. You're not required to, though. When can I file for office? We'll have the candidates packets online on the website no later than Friday, June 21st. Since the legislature's in session right now, sometimes they change the forms, and we want to make sure we have the current forms available for you. If for some reason you don't have a way to print the forms, just contact me or the staff in my office, and we'll be glad to print the forms for you. The first day to file is Monday, July 22nd at 8 a.m., and the last day to file is Monday, August 19th at 5 p.m. And where do you file? You file it with me in the city secretary's office at 1515 North Galloway, and we're open Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Along with filing for council, there are certain reports, financial reports, that will be due. There's a personal financial statement that all candidates have to complete, and it's due no later than Monday, September 9th at 5 p.m. Campaign finance reports, like I said earlier, if you file your campaign treasurer appointment now, you'll be required to file the July 15th semi-annual report. And then there'll be a 30th day financial report that's due by October 7th by 5 p.m. and an 8th day report by Monday, October 28th. And that's where you list all your expenditures and any funds that you've collected. Important dates. I've already went over when the packets will be available, the semi-annual report in July. The drawing for the place on the ballot will be Wednesday, August 21st. I don't have a time set yet. Normally it's around 9 a.m. But any of the candidates that file, you'll be notified of that. And also at that meeting, we'll have a candidate orientation. We'll have some forms if you need some extra forms, petitions. Well, no, that's just a drawing. Never mind. We'll give you information on where you can place your signs and when you have to have the signs picked up. And we'll take any questions that you have. And, of course, anytime after you file, if you have any questions, you can contact me and I can help you with that. Personal financials due by September 9th. Early voting begins Friday, November 1st. That's when it ends. It begins Monday, October 21st. And for the November election, Dallas County, I have to contract with Dallas County and Kaufman County because we have some Kaufman County voters. Dallas County is going to have what they call countywide polling places on Election Day. So you can go to any polling place on Election Day. This is the first time they've ever done this. You don't have to go to your precinct on Election Day. So it's kind of like the early voting where you can go to any polling location. The canvass, we have to canvass no later than Monday, November 18th, and that's council will set that date when we get to that point. And then that's when the oaths of office are administered. And then the next campaign contribution expenditure report is due January 15th of 2020. Everyone that has an open campaign finance form has to file the semi-annual reports in July and January of each year. And I think that's about all I have. Yes?
All of this information will be available on the city's website. So
Yes.
those of you who are trying to write down all the dates, all
Yes.
this will be available.
Or you can contact me and I can email it to you if you have any certain information you're looking for. Does anyone have any questions? Nope. Okay, then who's next? Debbie?
Okay, good evening. I'm Debbie Moll, the Director of Finance for the city. So as Cliff mentioned, one of the major responsibilities of City Council is to adopt the city's annual budget. And it's huge because if you think about it, all of the citizens in Mesquite, they invest money in the city through property taxes, through sales tax, through user fees that they pay. So, and because of all that investment, they receive city services in return. So I like to say, if Wayne will flip my slide, that city services are a return on investment that you as citizens put into the city. You expect something in return. And it's a big responsibility for us as staff, but it's another big responsibility for city council members. So one of the big things is the total annual budget. So if you look at the city of Mesquite, we have a population of around 145,000, and we have an annual budget, total annual budget of about $250 million. That's $250 million. So there's a lot of money invested in Mesquite to run the operations of this city. Now, the annual budget covers more than just general fund. Many people think it's just general fund operations, police, fire, libraries, parks and rec. But the city annually budgets for 5 operating funds. You have the general fund, you have the water sewer fund, the drainage fund, the airport fund, and the municipal golf course. Those are all the 5 operating funds. We have 5 debt service and reserve funds. We have 2 internal service funds, 9 special revenue funds. That's special revenue for a specific purpose, like the housing program or grant programs and things like that. And then we have 8 capital project funds, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. So in total, the city has 29 funds that the city council looks at every year during the annual budget process and budgets that $250 million, and that's where it is as of the fiscal year 2019 budget. So when they adopt the budget, they're adopting for all 29 funds. So when you think about the revenue sources for the city of Mesquite, there really are 4 main revenue sources. One, of course, is property taxes, and I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. Sales tax, that's obviously, for the state of Texas, the sales tax rate in most cities is 8.25%. Well, only 2% of that on all the taxable sales within the city of Mesquite come back to Mesquite to be used in operations. User fees, I'll talk about in a little bit more detail, and then other revenues would be things like fines and forfeitures that are set by state or other authorities, grant funds, reimbursements or donations and contributions. Those are some of the other revenue sources that really City Council doesn't have much say in what those amounts are, but they can have a say in whether the city wants to accept a grant program or not, or a contribution or not, and tie ourselves to any requirements related to that money. But for the most part, they don't really have any say in how much that money is for. So those are the 4 main revenue sources. So let's talk a little bit more about property taxes. You all are very familiar with property taxes. And it is true, the city council adopts the city property tax rate on an annual basis. So I want you to keep in mind, though, that only 29% of a Mesquite citizen that owns property, only 29% of your total property tax bill goes to the city. There are other taxing authorities in the city of Mesquite, and you see them listed here. MISD represents 48% of your tax bill. Dallas County is 9%. The hospital district gets 10%, and then the Dallas County Community College District gets another 4%. So your total property tax bill, of that, only 29% goes to the city. So that is the 29%. That's the only portion that city council is setting the tax rate for. So if you're concerned about certain elements of your tax rate going up, look at which element it is. Is it city, or is it school, or is it the county, one of those county entities? So the other thing to keep in mind with property tax that council really doesn't have control of is the Dallas Central Appraisal District and the Kaufman Central Appraisal District. They set the values, the taxable values in the city. We as city staff don't set those values. Council does not set your property tax values. The appraisal districts do. And there's a whole process there where citizens can appeal that, right? And we're in the midst of that right now. But the other thing is to think about is that the tax rate that the city council sets is set in order to generate enough revenue, property tax revenue, keeping in mind those other revenue sources to run the city operations that are important to you as citizens. So that's the property taxes. As far as the user fees, and council does set the users' fees and rates for the city. These would include things, they're charges for particular services or activities or goods that citizens or customers choose to participate in, okay? This is like the water sewer rates. That's what runs the water sewer operations in the city. The drainage fees run our drainage project that is mandated by the state and federal requirements. Other fees include things like parks and rec, like all these kids that are over here right now. They pay fees to participate in these rec centers or the athletic programs. Permit fees like building permits, or even like restaurants have to pay different fees and things like that. Rental rates, library services, those are the kind of other fees that the city charges. So what happens each year is the staff reviews their operations, and you saw the whole slew of department directors that Cliff oversees. If we have rates or fees that we charge people, we review those once a year, and during the annual budget process, we take any changes to City Council. So that they're looking to make sure that we're charging reasonable fees and rates to cover the cost of whatever service or goods that we're providing to the citizens. So they're set at a level to cover costs. The city is not in the business to make money. We're in the business to cover our cost and run the city according to what you as citizens want here in the city of Mesquite. So council does all that. The other thing that a council member gets involved in is, of course, then setting the spending allocation. So we talked about all the revenue coming in, but then how can the city spend that money? So the city council approves spending allocations, and I thought it might be helpful. We really kind of have 4 categories of spending within the city. So in all those different funds that I showed you, many of the operations have personal services. That's what comprises salaries, wages, and benefits to city employees. And as Cliff mentioned, we have about 1,200 employees that run the city in different capacities. We also need supplies. You know, it takes supplies to, whatever supplies it is to run a particular operation. Like in the street maintenance operation, they need supplies like the asphalt to go out and patch potholes. Now in finance, I just maybe need pens and pencils, but each department is a little bit different. So that's our supplies. Contractual services is another category of spending. That involves things like legal fees or consulting fees, utilities or maintenance and repair type costs, training costs, things like that. And again, it just varies based on the city department or operation that we're talking about. Another big area is capital outlay. And this is for cost for equipment or major capital projects. And when we talk about that, it could be a street repair or a brand new street. It could be working on buildings that the city owns, or it could be the infrastructure, the water and sewer lines, things like that. These are financed mostly through bond proceeds. So every year, and council just approved our bond sale at the last council meeting. So we list all the capital projects for a fiscal year. So when council is approving the annual budget, they're approving a list of capital projects for that next fiscal year that are funded by bond proceeds. So all of that is a part of what City Council is looking at and approving on an annual basis. So that's the spending allocations. So I do want to just spend a minute on the general fund. This is the fund that most citizens are most aware of the operations, because this is what provides you with most of the services that you need as a citizen of Mesquite, like street lighting or traffic signals or police officers or libraries and things like that. So you can see here the breakdown of the this is the main operating fund, but 53%, because 50% of that $250 million budget, 50% of that is made up of the general fund operations. So about $125 million is what it takes to run our general fund. And these are the areas that are comprised of that. Public safety is police and fire. More than half of your general fund budget is going to public safety. That should make you feel good as a citizen in the city of Mesquite. 15% goes to debt service, and that debt service, again, is what's paying for those bond projects. That's your streets and all your infrastructure to take care of all of that. General government is city management, and a lot of us that are here tonight, it's our operations to run the city. Public works, this is your streets, your sanitation crews, things like that is what's in the general fund. Quality of life services, this is planning and development, housing and community services, neighborhood services, and then program services is small, it's parks and recreation and library. So that's what makes up the general fund. Now, I wanted to mention too, for the general fund, the revenue sources that we talked about, 45% of that is property taxes that fund general fund. 27% is sales tax. So about 72% of the general fund revenue source to fund all these operations comes from property taxes and sales tax. Then there's a few other minor fines and forfeitures and fees and things like that. So that's your general fund operations. So let's talk about then when City Council has to do this every year, it's quite a process. It actually is it's a year-long process for us as staff. But if you look at this schedule here, in January, the City Council will have what they call a policy retreat. And this is where they've listened to citizens all year long or all the time, and they're putting together their strategies of what do they want to accomplish in policies for the city over the next year or over the next 5 years. And then in March, they come back together and they start to narrow that down to some goal setting that we as a staff are going to be directed to work at over the next year. And then the city manager, we as staff actually start preparing our budgets for the next year as early as February and March. And then we present information to the city manager. He presents then a proposed budget to the city council in July. So that's coming up. City council then over July and August will review those budget numbers. We hold budget work sessions with them to go over in detail various departments that they want to know more information about. And they also hold public hearings. Our city council, we have at least 3 public hearings where the public can come in and ask questions, give their input on the annual budget process. And then in August, they have to set a tax rate, at least identify what they're anticipating the tax rate to be. Then in September, they have to approve any fee or rate changes, approve the budget, and then officially adopt the tax rate for the next fiscal year. Our fiscal year is October 1 through September 30th. So that kind of follows with this cycle for the budget calendar. So the last thing I wanted to mention is U.S. citizens should know that all financial information for the city is available on the city website. One of the things that council wanted was for us to be a transparent city, and that's a big initiative in government today. And the city manager has taken that seriously. We achieved, the Texas Comptroller's Office had a program called Transparency Stars. There were 5 categories. The 5 categories included, and we earned the 5 stars as of last fall. We were the 6th city in the state of Texas to achieve all 5 transparency stars. So you should be glad to know that we're very transparent with the financial information. We've achieved those 5 categories. It's traditional finances, contracts and procurement, economic development, debt, and public pensions. So when you go to the city website, and I have it here up in the right corner, that's the main page of the city website. You can see the yellow highlight there, government transparency. It right on the front page. You click on that government transparency, it's going to take you to the transparency landing page. And on here, the 3 areas that I'm pointing out to you tonight, the financial transparency right there is where these 5 stars, the information that the state comptroller felt was important for U.S. citizens to know about, is located there. Along with those 5-star categories, we also put out there the open budget. There you can go in and see the spending. You can see the budget and the spending as the year progresses, and it's updated every Friday at 4 p.m., so it's very accurate and very up to date. You also can see the open checkbook. That is the checkbook of the city. So it might be interesting to go and click on that and see it's all the checks that are issued. And that, again, that's updated every Friday. We have check runs Tuesdays and Thursdays, and that's how we pay the city's bills. And you can see the check run, the checkbook there online on the transparency page. So we're very serious about being transparent and want U.S. citizens to know that that information is available to you at any time. So that is the finance side. Budget is a big part of what a city council member does. So at this point, I'll answer any questions. Anybody have questions? Sonia told me I would put you to sleep with my budget information. So, so next, I believe, is Mr. David Pascal, our city attorney.
Good evening, everyone. I'm David Pascal. I'm your new city attorney. I've been with the city down here at City Hall since January this year. Prior to that, I did have a chance to serve the city in different capacities, got to know some of these staff members over the years. Our city manager, Mr. Keeley, referred to the excellent staff you have. I do want you to know from getting to work with these folks, you do have some excellent people working on behalf of the city and for you. And another thing I've learned is they work very, very hard. I have firsthand experience with that. So anyway, I'm hoping that eventually you and my peers will come to consider me a part of the excellence and staff that the city has here. So I've been asked to talk with you about just some of the general requirements that impact a council member and their role and their job duties. There are many different things that do impact a council member and what they do. For instance, we have a city charter, which Mr. Keeley referred to. We've got a code of ethics. We've got policies and procedures, and they address a number of different things like nepotism, and conflicts of interest. But 2 things I'm going to talk to you about tonight are the Texas Open Meetings Act and the Public Information Act. Some of you may have heard the saying that sunlight is the best disinfectant. That sort of applies to the Open Meetings Act and the Public Information Act. The purpose of I may call it TOMA every now and then, that's our abbreviation for it, is to ensure that the government is transparent, open, and accountable. And then the purpose of the Public Information Act is to guarantee public access to government information in the interests of providing transparency in government. So you see transparency occurring in both of those. And that relates back to what Debbie told you about the city's efforts to make its operations very, very transparent. And the city's very proud, and at the council's urging, that we do have those 5 stars of transparency from the comptroller's office. So that concept of openness or transparency, that may seem kind of simple, but the application of that is not always that simple. So for instance, the Open Meetings Act has over 75 sections. The Public Information Act has almost 150 sections. And within those sections, there's hundreds of subsections, and they have all the rules, the regulations, the exceptions, and then something only lawyers can appreciate, the exceptions to the exceptions. We like those. But I don't want anybody running for the door. I'm not going to unload all of that on you tonight. We're going to do a real high overview just so you can understand why it is the council acts a certain way occasionally, and so some things that you might be interested in. So we're going to talk about, let's start with the Texas Open Meetings Act, what it applies to, when it applies, notice requirements for meetings. We'll talk a little bit about record requirements for all of the meetings, procedures for holding open meetings or executive sessions, which are also called closed sessions, and then some penalties. And you can keep all of this in context of the general rule that a governmental body's meeting must be open to the public unless the Open Meetings Act expressly provides for a closed meeting. So there's that transparency again. So when does the act apply? The Open Meetings Act applies to a meeting of a governmental body. Your city council is a governmental body that is subject to this act. So we need to look at what is a meeting. And so I've got outlined for you the statutory requirements of what constitutes a meeting of your city council. So first, it's a quorum of the governmental body. You've got 7 council members, and so a quorum is a majority of that, so that's going to be 4. So it applies anytime there are 4 of your city council members. Number 2, discussing the public business of the city. All right, so you've got to have quorum and discussing public business, and 2 things, one of 2 things. The member of the city council participates in the discussion, or it's a called meeting of the city council, and they're conducting the meeting. Now, that second one, that's easy. That's the city council meetings that you see on the internet or come to see yourself. The first one's interesting, though. Be sure to notice there's no notice of that. So if you've got 4 council members sitting around talking public business, then we've got a bit of an issue. And as a matter of fact, that's why I don't think we've got a quorum here tonight. But just in case, as Mr. Keeley said, the city secretary does a great job of this. This meeting was noticed as a potential city council meeting just in case we had a quorum here. We want to be always careful to comply with the law and make the public aware of what's going on. Now, the Attorney General's advice in connection with dealing with the Open Meetings Act is you just develop the habit of for a council member saying, okay, is this a meeting? And I would suggest that a council member go a step further and say, if they have to ask themselves that question, they might want to back away from what's going on, just because there may not be anything wrong going on, but if somebody else has the perception that the act might be being violated, then that's a problem. We just want to avoid those issues. All right, so in order for a city council to have a meeting, there are some notice requirements. I already mentioned a little bit about that. There's got to be a written notice, and that notice has to include the date, hour, and place of where the meeting is. And importantly, it's got to include the subject of the meeting. And that doesn't mean you can use something like old business or new business. It's got to be a specific subject that's being discussed. As a matter of fact, it's got to be adequate to apprise the public of the business that's being discussed. And these notices are also posted on our internet. All right, the Act also requires that certain records be kept, and that's where the city secretary's office comes in. There's always going to be minutes of these meetings that are kept. I hope all of you have had a chance to go to the city's website and see that the audio or the video that's taken, it includes the audio as well. And all of this are public records, and they're available at anybody's request. Ms. Mull mentioned the website a moment ago. I don't know if you noticed, there's a government tab on that home page. If you go there and click on it, you can get any of the agenda of the council. You can get all of the past minutes. If there's a meeting coming up or even past meetings, they have the packets there. You might be amazed at all of the information that these council members study in connection with them making their decisions. And what always I find really remarkable is the video of the meetings. They're indexed by subject matter. So these meetings, as some of you know, can go on for a few hours. And if you're only interested in part of those meetings, you can click on that and zap, you're right over there, and you can see the video from that. It really is very good. All right, so let's look at some of the requirements that apply to an actual city council meeting. This gets into why we do things the way we do them, and maybe you've wondered about this. So first of all, the meeting can't start until you've got a quorum present. So if you got 3 members and somebody's running late, it's not going to start. No action is going to be taken until that 4th member gets here. We never have that problem, though. You may find this interesting. There's no requirement in the Open Meetings Act that citizens be allowed to talk, provide input. Now, there are other laws that provide for that, but the Open Meetings Act doesn't. But our council begins each meeting, you'll see this on all the agenda, with a citizens forum. And that provides the citizens an opportunity to come up and talk about whatever is on their mind, whether it's on the agenda or not. But you do need to know, sort of as we covered before, that agenda has to notify the public of the subjects that are being discussed. So if a citizen comes up and wants to discuss something that's not on that agenda, the council can't deliberate it, can't take any action. What they can do is they can provide factual information, the staff assists in that. Somebody can suggest you put it on a future agenda, and often the staff is there at these meetings, and so the mayor can then refer that person to a staff member who hopefully can get to work with that person on whatever it is that's of concern to them that night. All right, I mentioned executive sessions or closed meetings. You can't have a closed meeting unless the Open Meetings Act expressly provides a provision that says you can meet in a closed session for this purpose. And you may have noticed a little ritual when this occurs. First of all, the quorum's got to be present. You can't do anything with the quorum present. You got to convene. So often, this may seem odd, but often you'll see that city council come in, they'll sit down, they'll open the meeting, and then the mayor will say, we're going to go to closed session. That's because the Open Meetings Act requires that. Not only requires that, he'll start reading the section from the Open Meetings Act that we're going to adjourn and have the executive session on. And then also our city secretary will keep a certified agenda or tape recording of that meeting. Most of you probably know when the council can meet in executive session, but I've got the most common times that they do. One is to deliberate real property issues such as the purchase, exchange, or lease of real property. Personnel, you can deliberate the appointment, employment, discipline, or dismissal of a public officer or employee in closed meeting. You can go into closed meeting for economic development to discuss commercial or financial information or incentives to a business prospect. And also, my favorite, you can go there to consult with your attorney on any litigation or settlement offers or to seek legal advice. All right, you should know that the Open Meetings Act is, it's not aspirational, it's the law. And it's not only the law, there are also penalties for violating it. So I wanted to review those real quick. Civil penalties, so if the city council did something in violation of the Open Meetings Act, say they authorized execution of a contract, that contract could be voidable. So it's real important for our staff to make sure that that doesn't occur. But there are also criminal penalties. So if a council, and I've got only one of them here covered I want to talk with you about, it's a really interesting one. If the council knowingly conspires, or council member knowingly conspires to circumvent the act by meeting in numbers less than a quorum for purposes of secret deliberations, that's called a walking quorum. And there's a criminal penalty for that. The walking quorum is real interesting. So you can imagine, and this actually happened, I think it was in some town out in West Texas. Senior staff member holds up in an office and a council member's in there. And then one after another, other council members parade in and parade out, parade in, parade out. There's never 4 of them at a single time, but they're all going in, going back out, going in to discuss public business, same thing. That's a walking quorum, and that's a violation of the Open Meetings Act. And it's a misdemeanor, and you can be fined up to $500 on that. I do need to point out on this criminal penalty, we've talked about the legislature, city council. Supreme Court actually affects us also. In this case, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals ruled the criminal penalty in connection with walking quorums, or struck it down for vagueness this last February. Texas legislature, though, is on top of that. They've got some bills working through there, and I feel confident that that penalty will be reenacted this session. All right, so let's go ahead and move now to the Public Information Act and do kind of a similar exercise. When does it apply? What are some of the procedures? In the Public Information Act, the Attorney General plays a big role, so I'll talk a little bit about that, and then enforcement and penalties. And then just consider all of this in the context of the general rule that all information is presumed public, just like all meetings are presumed open, unless the statute allows it to be withheld. All right, so what does the public information apply to? All right, it's going to apply to all public information. So that kind of begs the question, well, what is public information? So public information is all information that's collected, assembled, and maintained under law or ordinance. That's simple enough. Or in connection with the transaction of official business by a governmental body, and the city's a governmental body, and the city council as well, that is subject to the act. All right, let's drill down on that just a little bit. All right, so what is information? You know, essentially information is anything that's not verbal. So it can be paper, video, you know, emails, texts, data that's sitting on your computer. All of that is can be public information. And interesting, and it's important to note, it's not just information that is over in Sonia's office, in the city secretary's office. It's information that's in any of our offices. And it's not only in any of our offices, if it's the public information subject to the act, it could also be information that is on a personal device, a home computer, for instance. So we do have to be careful about that. All right, so how is this public information made available to the public? We make a great effort through that website to push out through transparency as much of that information as we possibly can. But if you can't find it there, even if it's there, or if it's something that's not there, then you can submit what's called a Public Information Act request. And the city secretary is our Public Information Act officer. There's a link on the website. You click it, and you can begin that process right away. But do know it has to be in writing, and an email does count. So if you call down to City Hall and you ask for something, you're going to get good customer service. The city's going to make an effort to do what we can. But to bring the Public Information Act into work, you do have to submit that in writing. Now, in connection with a request, the city doesn't have to create new documents, doesn't have to answer questions, although we're pleased to answer whatever questions we can. And I'm pleased that I don't have to do any legal research if you ask for that. But we always do make a good faith effort to produce this stuff to you. All right, so we get a request. How does the city respond to a request? So the city's required to promptly produce information that's requested by the public, and that's as soon as possible without delay, which means a reasonable time under the circumstances. And a reasonable time is usually, well, it's 10 days is the standard, but if it's a large volume of information or it's just logistically hard to assemble it all, that time period can expand, but we have to work that out with you, let you know that that's occurring. No favoritism can be shown. All requests are treated the same, and some fees can be charged in connection with copying and producing this information. So I mentioned the Attorney General. The Attorney General does play a process in this. So the government gets a response, the city gets a request, and asks for some information, and the city thinks that it shouldn't be produced because the Public Information Act says, well, this is accepted, you shouldn't or can't or shouldn't produce this information. What does the city do? The city at that point has to submit the request and the city's position down to the Attorney General. We have to submit what's called a request for Attorney General's opinion. And that's got to include the request, that's got to include the exceptions that we think we apply, that's got to include the documents or a representative sample of the documents that have been requested, and then ask the AG for an opinion. All right, so what does that process look like? I'm not going to take you through the whole process. Matter of fact, this is just kind of an overview of the process. But what I do want you to know is that there are deadlines for asking for the AG opinion. If we blow that deadline, the information has to go out. There's deadlines for the Attorney General to make a response, so you will get a response eventually. And during all of this process, the requester is kept informed of what's going on. And then at the end of this process, the AG will issue an opinion, and whatever the AG says can be withheld will stay at the city, and whatever has to go out will come out to the requester. All right, so like the Open Meetings Act, the Public Information Act has some penalties. The civil remedies is if the, let me see, if the government does not provide what's been requested, the requester can file suit against the city or make a complaint to the AG, and the court can issue an order requiring the city to produce this information. And the city also has a remedy. Say we ask for an opinion from the AG, the AG issues an opinion we disagree with, then the city can file suit as well. But the requirements for doing that is you got to go down to Austin to file the lawsuit, and you got to do it within 30 days of that opinion being issued. All right, and there are some penalties as well. So for instance, if someone refuses to provide public information or misuses it, there can be up to 6 months in jail, $1,000 fine, and if you're a public official, you can be removed from office for that. And then for destroying information, up to 3 months in jail and $4,000 fine. So even though I know I've tried to give you a high overview of the Texas Open Meetings Act and the Public Information Act, I know that's still a lot of information. I want everyone to know the staff works extremely hard to help council members understand what their role is, what the restraints are, and make sure they not only meet the requirements of the law, but exceed those requirements. I started out by saying that the sunlight of the Open Meetings Act and Public Information Act is meant to bring transparency. I hope my discussion of the sunlight hasn't caused a cloud of concern for any of you, because as I said, the staff is here to help everybody. All right, thank you.
Thank you, David. And if you ever want a really good lawyer joke, David has tons of them. So with that concludes our presentations for tonight. If you want to hear this exciting information again, especially the Open Meetings Act and a little bit more on that, we do have 2 other meetings coming up, I believe next Tuesday and next Thursday. One we want to call particular attention to is if you've never been to a city council meeting or interested in seeing a little bit of behind the scenes, next Tuesday we'll meet at City Hall. And we will meet in the council chambers and kind of walk through some of the things that Sonia and David kind of talked about on the process of when Citizens Forum is, where we go for executive session, kind of a peek behind the curtain. And so we invite y'all, if you're interested, to join us then. So all of the information that we have tonight is available on the city's website. We will also repackage the presentations. As you can see, we're videotaping. And so all of this information can be viewed again. So I know some of y'all were taking notes. If you didn't quite catch something, it's all there again. So and again, one thing to point out, Sonia does an excellent job of putting all of this information out. She is a good resource for people who are considering running for city council. The forms can be scary. There's some deadlines. David talked about putting you in jail a couple of times. Sonia's really good about kind of helping you walk through the process. So if it is something you're considering and you want a little bit of, a little bit more guidance, she can't do it for you, but she can kind of show you what the form looks like, when you need to fill it out, and when you need to get it into her. And that is the one thing that we are specific on. We cannot fudge on any of those dates and times that she talked about on the submitting. So once that deadline comes, that's the deadline. So we are welcome to answer any questions that anybody has about the process, what the city does, any of our jobs, any budget questions. I'm sorry. Oh, and if you do have a question, please go up to the microphone. I didn't see anybody raise their hand or anything. So, and like I said, it's while it's a public meeting, we're limited on what we can say publicly. All of us will be here, especially Debbie and I can Wayne Larson, our communications director. We can answer any questions that you have about other things. If you've got if there's somebody next door to you with high grass, we can take those as well. So, but I do appreciate your time tonight. It's one of those things we want to make sure every citizen is informed as they can about their city. It helps us do our job better to hear from you, and the more you know, the better we are. So again, thank you for being here tonight, and we thank you.